this world that the rest of us are taking advantage of. India has the world's largest middle class and the world's largest number of really poor people. Both India and China have a hard time connecting the centers of their prosperity with the people who live in small towns and rural areas, and so do we in America. So do all places of vast geographic expanse. It's quite interesting that size used to be a high predictor of the ability to produce broad-based prosperity. Now, look around Europe, or look at Africa, look at any place. People who live in countries that are compact, where people live close together and have easy access to each other and common resources, tend to have more luck in generating economic opportunity and then making sure that the circle of opportunity encompasses pretty close to everybody. So the world is unequal in terms of economic opportunity, and by extension in terms of access to education, health care, capital, and a whole range of other things. And this inequality, besides being a personal and social tragedy, is a severe constraint on a nation's growth. Every time a first-generation immigrant doesn't finish school, it hurts that person. It hurts the country where she or he lives. And we have to do something about it. We have to find a way to make our economic models more employment intensive. The second problem the world has is that it is too unstable. Instability is essential in a market economy. If you're going to reward success, there has to be the possibility of failure. And then people have to be able to pick themselves up off the ground and begin again. I lost 2 elections. A lot of my friends in business have failed and succeeded. But if there is too much instability, you might as well have a static society, because people become so scared things shut down. That's what always happens after a financial crisis, and has for centuries. And what we're still trying to claw our way out of. In the United States today, we have fixed yesterday's problems, which societies are very good at. We're very good at fixing yesterday's problems. Not so good at predicting tomorrow's and converting them. So we have the best capitalized banks we've had in 20 years. But they're not making a lot of loans, especially to smaller enterprises who need something on the order of $200,000, $100,000 or less. We have set up these rules to try to prevent the last crisis. We don't know if they're too burdensome on the community banks that are trying to generate small business growth. We're still trying to work through all that. So that's an example of instability. The fear of cyber terrorism, the vulnerability we all have to acts of violence perpetrated for various political means, all of these things add instability to a society in ways that are destructive, not constructive. So the trick of the 21st century will be how to maintain enough instability to reward enterprise and good ideas and hard work and the ability to lead and the ability to entertain us in sport and music and all of that, but not to have so much instability that things shut down. And then we have to have these years dragging along as if we have chains on our feet, which is what is frustrating people in Europe and the US and elsewhere. If you have too much, it's a severe constraint on growth and opportunity. And finally, the world is not sustainable because of the way we produce and consume energy and other more localized resources. We just had our second major hurricane hit the northeast United States, which used to be all but unheard of. No one can say global warming caused these hurricanes. But it is clear that the oceans are warmer and that warmer ocean waters lead to more severe storms, and that they're warmer for us further north. It is clear that 90% of the ice pack on the top of Greenland, which contains 8% of the world's fresh water, suffered melt this summer, and the 100-year average is 50%. If all that water melts, it could be big trouble for you. Because if 8% of the world's fresh water falls into the North Atlantic, it could block the Gulf Stream, which is what keeps Northern Europe tolerable in the winter. And some of the world's most productive economies could revert to the temperatures of the little ice age 700 years ago, with calamitous consequences for 3 or 4 months a year. That's how it could affect you. Meanwhile, the most vulnerable countries to climate change are among the poorest. And if we just listen to the insurance and reinsurance companies who have an immediate stake, we are now in the second decade in a row where payouts by insurance companies for natural disasters have tripled the previous decade. Climate change is posing the risk that people in some areas near oceans where people love to live are going to become virtually uninsurable. And we have this crazy situation in America where one of our political parties still denies the reality of climate change, but members of those parties who happen to be mayors of cities along the coastline are working with their insurers to build back, to build up, to dig deep, so that they can get insurance. So they believe in what their ideology compels them to disavow. That's our problem, not yours. But it will be your problem if America doesn't do something serious. We have cut our aggregate emissions dramatically in the last 2 years, only partly because of the economic slowdown, largely because we're shutting our coal-fired electric plants and substituting natural gas, and because we're finally getting into the solar and wind business in a big way. But if you just look at the vista of opportunities you have, and then you think about everything that could go wrong, almost everything could be clumped into one of these 3 categories. The world is too unequal, it is too unstable, and it is unsustainable. And so I basically try to spend my life trying to figure out how to build up the positive and reduce the negative forces of our global interdependence in a way that create more space for people to live their dreams, pursue their hopes, and be empowered to do so. I think a big part of that is trying to integrate dealing with these things into business models, and for the non-governmental organizations, the NGO movement, to try to lead coalitions of the private sector and government into being more entrepreneurial. When I was president, we got an enormous number of our new jobs from small business. But the small businesses were being spurred by the fact that information technology in the 1990s spread into every aspect of the economy. So that when I look back on those 8 years, IT employment was only 8% of the total, but it was more than 20% of the growth and more than 25% of the wage growth of the country. It's the only time since the 1980s in our country when the bottom 20% earnings in percentage terms increased as much as the top 20%. We have to find ways to try to create this kind of entrepreneurial culture where we all focus more on what works. And meanwhile, to try to support the creation of more entrepreneurs. I'll give you just a few